The first time my wife told me she wanted a divorce, she was crying. The second time, she wasn't. She was sitting across from me at our kitchen table, completely calm, with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. And she said something I'll never forget. "Daniel, I don't love you anymore." I stared at her for several seconds, not because I didn't understand the words, because I did. What I couldn't understand was how a woman who had kissed me goodbye that morning, reminded me to pick up our son from school, and texted me a heart emoji at lunch, could suddenly look at me like I was a stranger. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 weeks later. I found a second phone hidden inside the lining of her old winter coat. And when I turned it on, I discovered that my wife hadn't been planning to leave me for the reasons she'd given me. She had been planning to leave me for someone else. But even that wasn't the truth. Not completely, because the person she had been secretly talking to wasn't the only person who had been lying to me. My family had known something was wrong, and one of them had been helping her hide it. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 38 years old, and until recently, I thought I knew what my life was supposed to look like. I had been married to Rachel for 12 years. We had a 10-year-old son named Noah, a small house in Ohio, 2 cars that were always in need of something, and the kind of ordinary family life that never looks impressive from the outside. But ordinary was exactly what I wanted. I grew up watching my parents fight about money. My father would disappear for days whenever things got difficult. My mother would pretend everything was fine whenever relatives came over. So when I got married, I promised myself I'd never build a home like that. Rachel and I weren't perfect. We argued. We got tired. We sometimes went to bed angry, but we always came back. At least, that's what I thought. Then Rachel started changing. At first, it was small. She started putting her phone face down. Then she changed her password. Then she began taking calls outside. One night, I asked her about it. "Who's calling you this late?" She didn't even look up. "Nobody." I laughed. "Nobody has a name now?" She looked at me. "Daniel, can you not do this?" "Do what?" "Interrogate me." That word bothered me. Interrogate. I'd asked one question, but I let it go. That became a pattern. I'd notice something. I'd ask. She'd become irritated. I'd apologize for asking, and she'd move on. A few weeks later, she started working late. Then she began going to the gym. Rachel had never been a gym person. I knew because we'd been together for 12 years. One evening, I jokingly said, "Who are you, and what have you done with my wife?" She smiled. But it wasn't the old smile. People change, Daniel. I didn't know then how important those 3 words would become. 3 months later, Rachel asked me to sit down. That should have frightened me more than it did. She was standing by the kitchen counter when I walked in. Noah was upstairs. The dishwasher was running. There was chicken on the stove. Everything looked normal. And then Rachel said, "I think we need to talk about separating." I thought she was angry. About what? About us. I stared at her. What happened? Nothing happened. That answer made no sense. "Rachel, people don't just wake up after 12 years and decide they want a divorce because nothing happened." She crossed her arms. "I've been unhappy for a long time." "How long?" She looked away. "Years." That hurt more than I expected. "Years, yes. And you never thought maybe we should talk about it?" I tried. "When?" She sighed. "Daniel, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You don't listen." I felt my chest tighten. "Then tell me what I didn't hear." She didn't answer. I stepped closer. "Please." Her eyes filled with tears. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was terrified. "Is there somebody else?" Her expression changed for half a second. Just half a second. But I saw it. "No," she said it quickly. Too quickly. "No, Daniel, there isn't anybody else." I wanted to believe her, so I did. Because sometimes when you're terrified of losing someone, you don't need them to prove they're telling the truth. You just need their lie to sound believable enough. The divorce discussion eventually reached my sister Melissa, and that's when things became worse. Melissa had always loved Rachel. Sometimes I thought she loved Rachel more than she loved me. When I told her what was happening, she immediately said, "Daniel, don't make this ugly." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means Rachel has been unhappy for a long time." "You knew?" Melissa paused. "I knew she wasn't happy, and you didn't tell me, because it's not my marriage." That sentence stayed with me, because she was right. But something about her tone told me there was more. A week later, Rachel moved into the guest room. Noah started noticing. One morning, he asked me, "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" I nearly dropped my coffee. "Why would you ask that?" "Mom told Grandma." I sat down. "What did she say?" Noah shrugged. She said you're going to be okay. I felt something inside me break. Not because Rachel had told her mother, because she had already started talking about my future without me. That night, I went to Rachel's room. Did you tell Noah we're getting divorced? She looked irritated. I didn't tell him anything. He knows. Kids hear things. Rachel, he's 10. Exactly. He understands more than you think. I stared at her. Then why am I the last person who understands what's happening in my own marriage? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, maybe because you never paid attention. That sentence destroyed me, because I had. I had paid the mortgage. I had worked overtime. I had taken Noah to school when she was exhausted. I had sat beside her hospital bed when she had surgery. I had held her mother's hand at the funeral. I had spent 12 years trying to be the husband I wished my father had been. And suddenly, none of it seemed to count. The divorce process started. Rachel asked for the house. I agreed. She wanted primary custody of Noah. I agreed to shared custody. She wanted me to keep paying certain bills while she got back on her feet. I agreed to that too. My lawyer actually looked at me one afternoon and said, Daniel, you don't have to surrender everything just because you're hurt. Maybe I was surrendering everything, but I wasn't ready to accept that my family was ending. Then, one Saturday morning, Rachel went to visit her mother. She left some winter clothes behind because she planned to collect them later. I was cleaning the closet when one of her coats fell from the hanger. I picked it up. Something felt strange. The lining was heavier on one side. I reached inside. My fingers touched plastic. I pulled out a phone. I stood there holding it. At first I told myself it was old. Maybe she'd forgotten about it. Maybe it didn't even work. Then it vibrated. One message appeared. Ethan, are you still sure you're going through with it? I stopped breathing. Ethan. I knew that name. Ethan Cole. Rachel had mentioned him once. A college friend. Nothing important, just an old friend who occasionally contacted her. I turned the phone over. My hands were shaking. There were hundreds of messages. I opened the conversation. The earliest message was from almost 8 months earlier. 8 months. 8 months before Rachel told me she had fallen out of love with me. I started reading, and suddenly every strange behavior had an explanation. The gym. The late nights. The phone. The sudden interest in changing her appearance. The emotional distance. It was all there. But then I found something that made my stomach turn. Rachel hadn't told Ethan she was leaving because she hated me. She had told him she was afraid. Afraid of losing the house. Afraid of losing Noah. Afraid that I would expose what she'd been doing. And then I saw a message from Ethan. Don't worry. Your sister knows. I read it again. Your sister knows. I dropped onto the floor. My sister, Melissa. I called Melissa. She answered immediately. Hey, what's wrong? I didn't say anything. She asked again. Daniel? I said, how long have you known? Silence. That was my answer. Known what? Don't do that. Daniel, I don't know what you're talking about. How long have you known about Ethan? Another silence. Then she whispered, where did you find out? I closed my eyes. That was when I realized something. Melissa hadn't been surprised. She had been caught. How long? Daniel, listen to me. No, you listen to me. How long? She began crying. About 6 months. 6 months. Rachel had been seeing Ethan for 8 months. Melissa had known for 6. And my wife had told me she stopped loving me years ago. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something hurts so badly your body doesn't know what else to do. You knew. Yes. You watched me sit at your house and tell you I thought I was losing my wife. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. Rachel said you were controlling her. I froze. Controlling her. She said she felt trapped. I looked around my empty house. Melissa, I was the one trying to save the marriage. She was miserable. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I thought you'd hurt her. That sentence changed everything. Not because I was angry. Because I finally understood how people had been describing me when I wasn't in the room. I asked, did Rachel tell you I ever hit her? No. Did I threaten her? No. Did I stop her from working? No. Did I stop her from seeing friends? No. Then what exactly did I do? Melissa started crying harder. I don't know. And that was the answer. Nobody knew. They had simply accepted Rachel's version because it was easier than asking questions. I confronted Rachel that night. She came through the door, carrying groceries. She saw my face. Then she saw the phone on the table. Everything changed. She put the groceries down. Where did you get that? I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because that was the first time in months she'd looked frightened. Your coat. She sat down. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even ask about Ethan first. I asked, "Why did you lie to me?" She stared at the table. I was scared. Of me. She didn't answer. Rachel. No. The word came out quietly. No. I wasn't scared you'd hurt me. Then what? She began crying. I was scared you'd make me feel guilty. That hurt. Rachel, you were cheating on me. I know. You told me you stopped loving me years ago. I know. You let me believe our entire marriage had been a lie. I know. She suddenly shouted. Then she covered her face. I stood there. And for the first time, I saw something I'd missed. Rachel wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because the version of herself she had built was collapsing. I asked, "Did you ever love me?" She looked up. Yes. When? Almost all of it. Almost. She shook her head. I don't know anymore. I picked up the phone. Was Ethan the reason you wanted a divorce? She stared at me. Then she said something I never expected. No. I frowned. What? Ethan wasn't the reason? Then what was? She wiped her face. Me. I said nothing. She continued. I kept telling myself that if I left you, everything would finally feel right. And does it? She looked at me. No. That was the first honest thing she'd said in months. 2 weeks later, we had a custody mediation meeting. Rachel's lawyer argued that Noah needed stability. Mine agreed. Nobody wanted a war. I had already decided that I wasn't going to use the second phone to humiliate Rachel. I only wanted the truth documented. Then Melissa called me. She said, "There's something you need to hear." We met at a coffee shop. She looked exhausted. She handed me her phone. I recorded this because I knew you'd never believe me. I pressed play. It was a conversation between Melissa and Rachel from months earlier. Rachel was crying, and Melissa was saying, "You can't keep doing this to Daniel." Rachel answered, "I know." "Then tell him." "I can't." "Why?" "Because if I tell him everything, he'll know I caused this," Melissa said. "You did." Rachel went silent. Then she said something that changed how I understood everything. "I don't want to be the bad person." I stopped the recording. Melissa stared at me. "What?" I asked. "Why did you record this?" She looked down. "Because I realized I had been helping her lie." Then she said, "And because I realized something else." "What?" "She wasn't leaving because you were a terrible husband." I waited. Melissa looked directly at me. She was leaving because she thought another life would make her happier. That was it. No hidden abuse. No secret financial disaster. No terrible husband. No monster. Just two people who had grown in different directions, and one of them had been too afraid to admit it honestly. The divorce was final 6 months later. Rachel got the house. I moved into a small apartment 20 minutes away. Noah stayed with both of us. The first few months were brutal. There were nights when I sat alone and wondered whether I should have fought harder. Maybe I should have been more romantic. Maybe I should have noticed sooner. Maybe if I had taken that vacation. Maybe if I had called her more. Maybe if I'd been different. Then one evening, Noah came into my apartment. He was carrying a school project. He sat beside me. "Dad? Yeah? Are you sad?" I looked at him. "Sometimes. Because Mom doesn't live here?" "Sometimes." He thought about that. Then he asked, "Is it my fault?" I felt like someone had punched me. I turned toward him. "No, but Mom said, whatever she said, listen to me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "None of this is your fault." He nodded. Then he asked, "Are you going to be okay?" I smiled. I think I already am, and for the first time, I realized it was true. A year after the divorce, Melissa came to my apartment. She brought coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. She looked uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology." I didn't answer. She continued, "I thought I was protecting Rachel." "You were." "No." She shook her head. "I was protecting the version of the story I wanted to believe." That sentence stayed with me, because that's what people do sometimes. They don't lie because they hate you. They lie because the truth makes them uncomfortable. Melissa hadn't wanted to believe that her friend had cheated on her brother. Rachel hadn't wanted to admit she had made a selfish choice, and I hadn't wanted to accept that my marriage was ending. Everyone had chosen the story that hurt the least, until the truth hurt more. I forgave Melissa, not immediately, but eventually. Rachel and I became civil, not friends, not enemies. Just two people trying to raise the same child after destroying the life they'd once built together. And Ethan? He disappeared from Rachel's life not long after the divorce. Apparently, the perfect future they'd imagined wasn't quite as perfect once it required actual responsibilities. I never asked for details. I didn't need them, because by then I had learned something important. About 2 years after the divorce, Rachel asked if we could talk. We met at a restaurant. She looked different, not better, just older, more honest. She said, "I owe you the truth." I smiled slightly. "You've given me a lot of truth lately." She looked down. "I was wrong." I waited. She continued, "I thought leaving you would solve everything. And it didn't. Why?" She looked at me. "Because you weren't the problem." That sentence should have made me happy. Instead, I felt sad. Not because I wanted her back, but because I wished she'd figured that out before destroying everything. She said, "I blamed you for things I was unhappy about inside myself." I didn't respond. Then she asked, "Do you hate me?" I thought about it. No. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why not?" I answered honestly. "Because hating you would mean I still need something from you." She stared at me, and I continued, "I don't." That was the moment I knew I had finally moved on. Not when I moved into my apartment. Not when the divorce became official. Not when Rachel stopped calling. I moved on when her apology no longer had the power to decide whether I was okay. I used to think losing my marriage was the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I was wrong. The worst thing was losing myself while trying to save it. I spent months asking what I could have done differently. But eventually, I understood something. There are relationships you can repair. There are relationships you can forgive. And there are relationships you can only survive by finally letting go. I don't believe Rachel was evil. I don't believe Melissa was evil. And I don't believe I was perfect. But I learned that love without honesty eventually becomes something else. And sometimes the person who hurts you isn't the person you should spend your life trying to punish. Sometimes the person you need to stop punishing is yourself. Because being betrayed doesn't mean you're worthless. Being abandoned doesn't mean you're unlovable. And someone else's decision to leave doesn't erase everything good you gave while they were there. Some people leave because they found someone better. Some leave because they stopped loving you. And some leave because they haven't learned how to be honest with themselves. You don't always get to know which one it is. But you do get to decide what happens to you afterward. And that was the part of my story nobody could take from me. I didn't get my marriage back. I got myself back. And honestly, that turned out to be enough. If you've ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a completely different story behind your back, I'd like to hear what happened. Tell me your story in the comments. And if you believe sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving someone, but learning how to stop blaming yourself afterward, subscribe to Lockup Archive, because sometimes the truth isn't hidden from us. Sometimes we're simply not ready to see it.